He's a genius. He's not a magician. However, we really did see positives. We saw a set move off the training ground and a goal in 81 seconds.
I promise you we won't have these struggles in a year's time. That is what Ruben Amorim said after his first game in charge of Manchester United. Saw the Reds cling on to a 1-1 draw at relegation threatened Ipswich. He tried some new things, and Sun Sports tactical guru Dean Scoggins had highlighted most of them in the build-up to the game. Dino, as always, you were spot on about a few things in the preview show, and you have got 5 points, as ever, on Tactics Exposed that fans should have but may not have noticed from Amorim's first game in charge of the Reds.
Yeah, they can still be excited, but Amorim's quick Bruno switch was the first one, and it could solve some of those issues they had in midfield. Amad Diallo, he was probably the only player to grasp it and go for it for United. Crashford, we're going to call it. 81 seconds the goal, but then it was downhill a little bit after that. Still work to be done. And massive Onana positives. But there was a bit of a head scratcher for me with Mazraoui and Diallo. And then Overthink, it's all over. They were just not quite there, United. And as Amorim says, they were just overthinking.
Right, Dino, before we get into the weeds, as we always do on Tactics Exposed, never mind Mystic Meg. What about Mystic Scog? Last week's episode of Tactics Exposed, it's a record for views, the most watched one we've done so far, which is great. And it was called How Ruben Amorim is Going to Resurrect Marcus Rashford. There we are, 81 seconds in, and I could just picture you in my head, sitting there, arms behind the shoulders.
I almost celebrated a Man United goal.
I
almost celebrated a Man United goal, which I know I shouldn't be doing. But
you got a few things spot on last week.
Yeah. I mean, look, most people said we'd stick to the 3-4-3, but, formation tick, playing out tick. I mean, Marcus Rashford, we debated whether he'd play off the front or be the front man. As Amorim said afterwards, he'd had couple of days with a lot of those players on the training ground and no time with some of the ones on international duty. So he gave Rashford that chance up front. We saw a set move off the training ground and a goal in 81 seconds.
Yeah, there we go. Look, Dino, we'll do your points in a minute as always, but it seemed a bit split, okay? Now, I personally looked at that and went, Ipswich are likely to go down this season. I've seen them in the flesh a couple of times so far. And my general opinion is that Kieran McKenna's a good manager, but they're a group of championship level players with a Premier League standard striker in Liam Delap, who's perhaps got them out of a few holes. So I was quite surprised to hear some Manchester United fans talking in quite positive terms. However, I was listening to a radio call-in after the game and there were equal numbers, if not more, going, what the hell was that? Regardless of any new system, I don't care if he's only had 2 days on the training ground, we should be beating Ipswich. Where do you sit?
Well, I think that the people who are being a bit more positive are watching the game properly, dare I say, in a Tactics Exposed vision. He's a genius, Amorim. He's not a magician. He cannot change everything in that space of time. However, we really did see positives, really did. And yeah, look, a draw at Ipswich is not the greatest result in the world. I would say that one thing I should have pointed out in the preview show, and I didn't, which was that Ipswich can play the same shape as the Amorim wants to play in. So they've had more time in that shape than those Man United players have in 48 hours. So they're more comfortable. But Man United have got better players. Amorim also said they're overthinking. So he needs to get them being a bit more natural in those positions. But yeah, look, you saw enough. And he said, you'll see my ideas, you'll see my ideas. Well, 81 seconds, we saw his ideas. And then we saw a few more after that. I actually think they should have been 2 up and maybe even 3 up by the time that Ipswich got that foothold in the game. And then Onana dragged them back into it and kept them in it later on. So, but I think a draw was fair.
Right, Dino, we'll get into some of the individual players and how they fitted in or maybe didn't fit in to the system at this early stage. We're going to start, though, with Bruno Fernandes. Telles and how maybe a quick switch relating to him could solve some of Amorim's early issues.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously there was a really fast start from him as well. He was involved in the build-up to the goal and the playing out, which we'll come back to in a minute. But it was sort of a he's everywhere and nowhere Bruno performance.
He's everywhere and nowhere, baby.
That's where he's at, yeah. Very good. 2 weeks in a row we've had lyrics. But yeah, he was involved, but he was involved too deep. And so what happened just after half-time was that Amorim switched his sides with Garnacho as those two forwards playing off. I'm sort of hesitant to call them tens because they were so mobile, but...
Inverted tens, you've been calling them?
Yeah, sort of inside forwards, something like that. You know, we'll find the name for him. We will find the name for him in the coming weeks. But he switched sides with Garnacho at the start of the second half. That didn't really work either. What was most positive for me, I thought, was when Bruno went back to be the 8. Yeah. And to be next to Ugarte as it was, because he'd come on off the bench as well. But what happened early on is that Eriksen and Casemiro, who were really, really poor, were just too deep. And so the gap, again, between the forwards and the defence was too large. There was this big sort of hole that Ipswich capitalised on. Eriksen got forward early on and had a really nice shot wide, and it had come off the back of a couple of really good moves from United. And I thought, wow, like, this is going to be really good. And then it sort of fizzled out. I mean, Casemiro was completely anonymous. Eriksen was getting dragged out into the wide positions, which is not what Amorim wants from that midfield too. It looked much more settled in the second half, even though the game gets more ragged as the game goes on, and Bruno was in there with Ugarte. So I would think that Bruno will play in there more going forwards.
So just a recap, in case people did miss the preview show, which you can still watch, by the way. I think it's worth going back and having a click on that one. But it's 3 central defenders pretty much, the 2 wide wing backs, and then it's 2 deep midfield players, and then the 2 inverted 10s, as you were saying, and then the main
number
man,
9.
Number 9, right? So that's the setup you predicted. That's the setup we got. Now, is it fair to say then that Casemiro and Eriksen, regardless of the fact that their best days are probably behind them, full stop, that they were a little bit maybe sort of confused, which is Amorim said that all the team were confused. They've only had a couple of days to sort of work on his new styles. Do you think it's fair to say that they were sort of a couple of victims of that because they weren't really sure sort of where they should be?
And it was confidence. It was definite confidence. It was confidence in the number 10s or the forwards can hold the ball so the midfield can move up. Those midfield 2 are often on the same axis as the wing-backs, so they should move up and down the field as a 4 together. But all too often, we saw Diallo get forward a lot early on, really, really up and down that side.
At wing-back,
at wing-back. And Amad, the other side, who we'll come back to, had a really good game and obviously a really fast start up the other side. But the midfield 2 were a little bit pedestrian. As you say, the best days are not just behind them, but a heck of a long way behind them. But they weren't up with play enough. And then what happens then, and Amorim talked about this to Roy Keane afterwards, was that you then can't press from a positive position because you're not high enough up the field, because then you don't bring the back 3 up with you. And then the centre-back on the left and the centre-back on the right should be able to press in the holes where midfielders are because they're confident they've got people to cover them. But it's like a knock-on effect.
And then there's just, I'm assuming, if then you've got the attackers pressing, and if the midfielders and the wing-backs aren't that sort of second line, if they're not up, you've just got a big gap in the middle for it to exploit.
And I felt a little bit sorry for Rashford after his goal because he was doing a lot of running and not getting a lot of joy. Garnacho made a lot of runs in behind, and Bruno was the one who came much deeper into those positions. But I just see Bruno as he's one of those players who wants to be involved all the time. And so if he's going to play that role, perhaps it's better in this system as an 8 than it is as a 10. And I was gutted that Kobbie Mainoo didn't make it through injury because I really wanted to see how he fits into that. But one other positive from Bruno, I must say, is that him and Garnacho were told when the ball's on your side of the field, you have to drop into that gap to come and receive the ball. Garnacho did it really well a couple of times and spun in behind Diallo's passes or Johnny Evans' passes over, and he sucked the defender with him. I've talked about it before, bringing that defender with you on a rope and then beating him in behind. And then the other thing was Bruno a few times dipped his shoulder in midfield, as we talked about, the Phil Foden style, let the ball run across you, and Saka does it beautifully as well. Let it run in behind you and go. He did that and sprung those attacks. So honestly, there were really positive signs. They just didn't quite follow it through.
Yeah, certainly some of the Man United fans on the radio phone I was listening to didn't see those positive signs. So just quickly then, Dino, for the Fernandes point, you can see a bit further down the line, rather than playing in one of those inverted 10s off the forward, you could probably see him as the ball playing one of the pair, because again, on the preview show, you said that of those two in the middle, under Amorim, it's usually like a bit of a wrecking balls, Palhinha
two different profiles.
And a ball player. Yeah. So you've Fernandes being the ball player of those.
And that was Ugarte and Bruno in the second half. And I especially see that happening at Old Trafford against some of the lesser teams as well, where they'll get more of the ball.
Cool. Amad World. I know you've got a penchant for calling players by their first names only, which infuriates me. Amad Diallo, the latest one in the stable, along with Trent and all the rest. He had a major impact early on in the game. Great run, laying on Rashford for the goal, and it all looked rosy. And you reckon that he's the only one that appears to have grasped what Amorim wants early doors?
Yeah, I mean, he picked it up and ran with it, literally. And that was it. He fully was in. You saw Amorim afterwards, arm round the shoulder. He's going to be a little bit of a favourite, I think. I'm not totally sure whether it'll be at wing-back the whole time. He could end up playing as one of those forwards as well. But it was the direct running that he showed. And look, first of all, again, let's talk about what we talked about on the preview show in the playing out from the back. And we actually showed a graphic where it went out to the wing-back in space. And then after that, he plays a 1-2 with Bruno, who dropped into that position, and then the runners go beyond. And we saw 5 runners going at the penalty area. But yeah, he was too deep as the game went on. But again, I think that's down to confidence and the midfield and the defence knowing where they're going to be. Also, credit to McKenna. He stuck Smodics over that side to try and cut the ball out to get, at the beginning it was going from Onana into midfield, over to Mazraoui and then straight over to Amad, and Ipswich were a bit like, oh my God, he's running at us again. And it felt like it was going to be a really long afternoon for Leif Davis at left back. But he was direct, he was quick, he ran at defenders, and as we said before, that Amorim loves players who run with the ball into the area, and that's what Amad can do.
Given that I'm going to have to do a lot of patting you on the back during this episode, which isn't my favourite thing to do.
I don't always get it right.
Yeah, this much is true. But given that that's going to happen, I think one of the things, perhaps to try and keep your feet on the ground a little bit, it's fair to say that perhaps you overlooked Amad in the preview show last week and where he may or may not fit in. And after one game, it's like, oh, actually, he's probably going to be a key part.
Yeah, completely right. And I thought we talked about lots of players in different positions, and I do think that a lot of them are going to be auditioning in different positions for a while. Yep. And I do think at some stage we will see Amad playing where Garnacho did yesterday.
One of the inverted 10s.
Yeah, one of those two players, and we will also see Garnacho move over to play in that wing-back role at some stage. But yeah, and there were lots of comments about Amad, so sorry fellas, that I didn't quite pay enough attention to Amad Diallo, but you couldn't not pay attention to him in the first 15 minutes. He was excellent, and clearly he's going to be a key player in this setup.
Quite. Now, Marcus Crashford. Now, I like that little title, Dino. Again, that was the main focus of the previous show.
This is nothing to do with his sports cars that he leaves in a wreck.
Quite. But we focus on the fact that, or how, Ruben Amorim could resurrect Marcus Rashford's flailing Manchester United career. Let's be honest. He smashes one in after 81 seconds, and it's like, wow, here we go. We spoke last week, or you said, that there's perhaps more than one position he can play in. Used to playing far out wide for United. If he was going to play in one of those inside forward positions, he might need a bit of learning to do. He actually played in the number 9 position, which you focused on how important that's going to be. What did you make of the overall Rashford performance?
Yeah, I thought it was confusing because it started so well and you thought, oh, we're going to see the confidence flooding back.
Yep.
And obviously, absolutely what we talked about with Amorim's way of playing is that number 9, you've got a job. When the ball goes wide, you are going to be on that 6-yard line to tap in. First time finishes, Gyökeres and at Sporting, and that is the way he's going to play. The ball went wide to Amad, and Rashford went for it, got in there. I'm going to be first, and it was really refreshing from Rashford to see. And then again, in lots of episodes this year, I've talked about unselfish runners.
Yeah.
And also in one episode we did on Manchester United when they lost to Spurs at Old Trafford, we talked about why those unselfish runners are not helping. The selfish runners are not helping them.
Yeah.
And what happened is first 20 minutes, Rashford made loads of runs down channels, into, out, taking defenders away, leaving that space behind him for Garnacho to run into. Bruno would go one way, Rashford would come to feet and the ball would go the other way. And he was doing it really well. And it was almost like he got fed up.
Right.
Of making those runs. Right. I'm fed up of being unselfish now. I've scored my goal. I want another goal. You can understand it. He's a goal scorer. He wants to score goals.
As a striker.
As a striker, yeah. But he got a little bit moody. And the idea being in that number 9 is that if you come to feet and then the ball goes in behind you, you're going to turn, run and get on the end of the next cross. So it's not that you're doing it for somebody else. You're actually doing it for yourself.
As much for yourself.
And I thought Liam Delap did much better at that for Ipswich, playing in that same sort of role where he kept dragging De Ligt out in sort of to the halfway line, flicking it round the corner and then leaving De Ligt behind and going again. Yeah. So it was an almost performance from Rashford, but I do think that when Højlund came on, it looked much more natural.
Yeah.
It looked more. I mean, Højlund's bigger. He's over 6 foot. He's more physical.
He's been playing in that position for so
absolutely, yeah. And pace-wise, they're fairly similar. I'm not going to talk about Xerxes because just no.
I don't think anyone wants to talk about Xerxes.
No, I don't think Xerxes wants to talk about Xerxes either. But it looked more natural that way when he came on. And I think we will see probably a different forward combination with Højlund up front and maybe Rashford as one of the other two in the coming weeks.
Yeah. Is there, just very briefly here, is there any chance Rashford got worn out perhaps? What part of the game did you see?
Well, I think there's big question marks over their fitness. I think there's huge question marks over their fitness.
Because they're going to have to work hard.
Absolutely. This is one thing about that formation, up, back. And he didn't do badly in the first half. Obviously, the goal is a fabulous start, but they're going to have to work a lot harder than that in Amorim's formation.
Yes or no, then, where does Rashford play? Is he a 9 or is he a 10? That's not yes or no, sorry.
No,
9 or 10.
No, I think he can be flexible. I think that, if Højlund's injured or if they're playing in Europe in the week, Rashford's shown he can get on the end of the crosses. Right. But then, if they're picking their absolute best team, I still think Højlund's the 9.
Yep. Onana positives, but Diallo and Mazraoui head scratchers. I got loads of grief for singing on the Onana. What's your game?
Well.
I think I know. Yeah, 2 for 2. But you were talking about him playing out from the back. Worth noting, first of all, that he was absolutely phenomenal with his hands as well. And let's be honest, if it wasn't for him, Man United lose that game. But from a tactical point of view, what did you notice? What do you think?
It was joyous from an actual training ground perspective because finally, Manchester United had a clue of what they were going to do playing out from the back. And it was, and I'm pleased to say this was another thing we got right in the preview show because De Ligt went to the edge of the area with one of the 2 midfield players. The other 2 centre-backs split.
This is when Onana's got the ball.
This is when Onana's got the ball. And often, he had the ball in his hands and he put it down.
Yep.
And then started to play from there. And so he had a right centre-back to the right of him, which was Mazraoui. A left centre-back was Evans. And then the wing-backs either side. And then they bounce the ball in between those and try and feed the wing-backs so then they can play 1-2s and go. 81 seconds, goal. Fantastic. It gave them more confidence. They did look like they had more of an idea to play out. They got a bit edgy at times and Onana hit a couple of long ones that he shouldn't have done. And Bruno and Eriksen in midfield were getting a bit frustrated with him, like you are allowed to play it between the lines. But let's cut him a break. He's had 2 seasons of Ten Hag's sort of chaos in front of him, so he's going to take time to gain that. But one thing for me was confusing was Mazraoui.
Yep, I was just going to bring him up because first of all, you did suggest last week that he would probably play the left wing back position. Bit of a surprise, I think it's fair to say, to see him on that left centre back with Diallo out wide. But he had the most touches of any Manchester United player.
By a long way. It was 127 touches. And I did expect him to play wing back.
Is that good or bad?
Well, depends which way you look at it. You'd much rather one of your 2 forwards have 127 touches, because generally you probably win the game quite easily. But the average in a Premier League game is sort of in the 80s mark.
Right. For each player?
For each player, for each player. And, you sort of, and that's every touch. That's not just time on the ball.
Yeah.
But what Ipswich did was at times they allowed him to have it. So it was quite clever. As I said, they sent Smodics over to cut off the pass to Amad on that side, and then they stopped the ball coming into midfield, which generally meant that Mazraoui was the one left.
Yeah.
So he had more of the ball. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen him on the left wing back instead of Diallo, and I do think Diallo can play as that right-hand side centre-back. They've got players to come back. They've got Maguire to come back. They've got Yoro to come back. They've got Martinez to come back. So there will be a lot of switches in that position. But it was a bit confusing because I do think that Diallo did get the ball in areas that Amorim wants him to get it, but he wasn't good enough on the ball. He was quite wasteful. There was actually a couple of times where he got in behind and he had a sort of weak left-footed shot at one stage. Another time he cut back and went backwards, which Amorim hates. Just run into the box and cross it.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm sure we'll see Mazraoui at left wing back at some stage. But Onana enjoyed himself.
He did. It was one of those lineups, Dino. You mentioned some of the possessions and the personnel. Before we move on to point 5, it's one of those lineups where I think, sometimes now you see those memes which are like, how did Manchester United win this Champions League game against Bayern Munich with this lol team?
Yeah.
And then it's like Jemba, Kleberson, Raphael and Fabio, just a load of like rogue Man United players. I feel like in 10 years' time, there'll be, do you remember this hilarious team?
Do you remember when they played Casemiro and Eriksen in centre midfield?
Casemiro and Eriksen, Johnny Evans in playing
Yeah.
in defence. Like, it's fair to say, isn't it, that once Amorim's team and all of his players and his squad are there, probably after a transfer window or two, it's going to be a totally transformed United 11.
Yeah, I mean, if he didn't know there was a huge amount of work to do, which I'm sure he did because he wouldn't have taken the job without that knowledge, but he soon saw it. I mean, some of the facial expressions he was giving on the sideline at different points was kind of, I'm sure I told him not to do that, But that's going to take time, and it will. And they'll be unrecognisable. I don't even think it will take 12 months. I think they'll be unrecognisable in 3 months.
Yeah, I've worked for you for about 6 years now, Dino. I've seen that expression on your face a few times. Right, overthink, it's all over. Amorim said in his quotes after the game, his players were confused. They haven't had a lot of time to pick up these new systems, these complicated passages of playing a new system. Talk to me.
Yeah, and he's right. And, we'll also mention Mason Mount in a minute because he's another player that we sort of neglected to talk about previously. But yeah, he was at pains to say, everyone's talking about my system. Like, it's not just about 3-4-3. It's about players doing the roles I tell them to do.
Decision-making.
Yeah, and decision-making within that. But that comes with time. And as I say, Ipswich played that formation and sort of went man for man, and they were more comfortable in their roles because they've played it more often than these Man United.
3-4-3,
absolutely, done it more often. Look, Man United have got better players, of course they have, but that doesn't mean that in the Premier League you're just going to flick a switch. So I get what he's saying. He wants players to be instinctive, but until they're drilled on the training ground day after day after day, until matches start to build up and they're in that area of the field where they think, no, hang on, I'm not here, I'm there. That's overthinking. So they're doing it in the wrong way. Until they're going here, 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 I'm just doing it automatically, then that's going to take some time. It is going to take some time. And again, Eriksen and Casemiro were in the wrong areas of the field. The wing-backs, instead of just going and knowing that they trust the guy inside to do it, are thinking, oh, is this where I run or do I stay? That split second in the Premier League is so vital. Yeah. This is high level, high level. You have an extra touch, a defender gets back. You don't play a first-time ball inside, then the striker's offside. We're talking about really, really fine margins, and you think, and it's all over. And so, but they've got a lot of work to go, but they've got a lot of improvement in front of them as well.
Yeah, over time, these things will become instinctive, won't they? The more they do them in training, the more they do them in matches. Plus, they've got Ugarte, Højlund, Mainu as well to come back. A lot of different faces you expect to see in that team. I'm going to wrap up, Dino. I've asked you at the end of last week. I'm going to do it again. Now you've seen one game. I give you a chance to pick a new Man United 11. Who do you think now, if everyone's fit and seeing what you have, how do you think it looks?
Well, I'm intrigued by Mason Mount for a start because Amorim 3 times now and twice almost unprompted has brought him up.
Yeah.
And whether that's to build his confidence back up or whether...
Remind everyone he's still there.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, he's a class player. He knows what he can do, and he could play like Bruno in 2 or 3 different positions in that formation as well. So, he was a bit flustered when he came on and probably didn't quite know what his role was supposed to be. Yeah. But I'm quite excited to see him in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully, for his sake and United's sake, we'll see the Mason Mount that was at Chelsea a couple of years ago and playing.
What's the 11?
You want the 11, right? You want the 11. Okay, I'm still going to say, obviously it's Onana.
Yeah.
I'm still going to say Yoro, De Ligt, Martinez as a back three. I think we're going to see Mazraoui as the left wing back. Yeah. Let's say that we're going to give Amad a run as another run as the right wing back. Then I'm going to say Ugarte and Bruno
there we go,
in midfield. And then I'd like to see Kobbie Mainoo or Mason Mount play with Rashford off of Højlund.